In 2008, Elon Musk walked into a room full of skeptical investors and said 4 specific words that instantly changed their minds about giving him money for what seemed like the most ridiculous business idea in history. These weren't technical terms, they weren't financial projections, and they definitely weren't what any business school teaches you to say when asking for investment. But those 4 words convinced investors to hand over $400 million for a company that had never made a profit, was burning through cash, and was trying to compete against car manufacturers that had been around for over a century. Today, that same company is worth over $800 billion, and those 4 magic words have since raised over $100 billion across all of Musk's ventures. But here's the crazy part. 97% of entrepreneurs have never heard these words. And the 3% who have are too scared to use them because they sound completely insane to traditional business thinking. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel where we decode the billion-dollar secrets behind the world's most successful entrepreneurs. If you're new here, I've spent over a decade reverse engineering the strategies that legendary business leaders use to build empires. So what were these 4 magical words that convinced investors to bet everything on Elon Musk's impossible-sounding projects? The words were, "This is inevitable." That's it. Not, "This might work." Not, "We have a good chance." Not, "Market research shows potential." Just 4 simple words. This is inevitable. And before you think this sounds overly simplistic, let me explain the devastating psychological impact these words have on human decision-making and why they've generated more investment capital than any other phrase in modern business history. It started in 2008 when Tesla was literally weeks away from bankruptcy. The financial crisis had destroyed most venture capital funding, General Motors was collapsing, and everyone thought electric cars were a joke that wealthy environmentalists bought to feel good about themselves. Musk needed investors to believe in something that seemed completely impossible, that electric cars could replace gasoline vehicles worldwide. Traditional entrepreneurs would have focused on market analysis, competitive advantages, or technical specifications. Musk did something completely different. He walked into that investor meeting and said, "The transition to sustainable transport is inevitable. The only question is whether Tesla leads this transition or gets left behind by someone else who understands what's coming." Notice what happened there. Musk didn't ask investors to bet on Tesla's success. He asked them to bet on their own ability to recognize inevitable change before their competitors did. This completely shifted the psychological framework from, "Will this risky startup succeed?" to, "Do I want to be on the right side of unstoppable change?" The neuroscience behind this is absolutely fascinating. When humans hear the word inevitable, their brains stop processing risk and start processing timing. Instead of asking, "What if this fails?" investors start asking, "When will this happen? And how do I position myself advantageously?" This triggers what psychologists call inevitability bias, where people become more focused on being early to a trend than on whether the trend itself makes sense. But here's where Musk's genius really shows. He didn't just use these words once and hope for the best. He built an entire communication system around inevitability that makes investors feel like they're discovering the future before everyone else realizes what's happening. When Musk pitched SpaceX to investors, he didn't focus on rocket technology or space tourism markets. He said, "Humans becoming a multi-planetary species is inevitable. The only question is whether we do it in our lifetime or leave it for future generations who will wonder why we waited so long." Suddenly, investors weren't funding a rocket company, they were funding humanity's destiny. When he presented Neuralink, he didn't get bogged down in neural interface technical details. He said, "The merger of human and artificial intelligence is inevitable. We can either develop this technology responsibly or watch other countries do it first." Now, investors weren't betting on brain chips, they were betting on maintaining American technological leadership. This inevitability framework has raised over $20 billion for SpaceX, several billion for Neuralink, and created the psychological foundation that made Tesla the most valuable car company on Earth, despite producing a fraction of the vehicles that traditional manufacturers make. But the real power of Musk's approach isn't just in the word inevitable. It's in how he structures the entire conversation around three psychological triggers that make investors feel stupid for not participating. First, he uses temporal urgency without artificial deadlines. Instead of saying, "We need to move fast," he says, "This transition is happening whether we participate or not. The question is whether we want to be leaders or followers." This makes investors feel like they're choosing their position in history, not just deciding on a business investment. Second, he reframes competition as collaboration with inevitability. Traditional pitches position startups against established competitors. Musk positions his companies as partners with unstoppable forces. "We're not fighting against the auto industry," he told Tesla investors. "We're helping the auto industry evolve into what it inevitably must become." Third, he makes contrarian thinking feel obvious rather than risky. When everyone said electric cars were impossible, Musk didn't argue about batteries or charging infrastructure. He said, "Of course, electric cars seem impossible if you assume current technology is permanent. Inevitability thinking requires imagining what becomes possible when constraints change." The results speak for themselves. Musk has raised more venture capital than any entrepreneur in history, not because his businesses were safer investments, but because he made investors feel like they were recognizing inevitable change rather than betting on uncertain outcomes. Here's how you can apply Musk's inevitability framework to your own pitches, whether you're raising investment, selling products, or convincing people to support your ideas. First, identify the unstoppable trend that your idea rides on top of. Don't focus on your solution. Focus on the inevitable change that makes your solution necessary. If you're building a food delivery app, don't talk about your app. Talk about how on-demand everything is inevitable, and your app helps restaurants participate in this unstoppable shift. Second, reframe your pitch from "Will this work?" to "When this happens, where do you want to be positioned?" Instead of defending your idea against skepticism, make people feel like they're choosing their role in inevitable change. Third, use specific timeline language that creates urgency without pressure. Don't say, "We need investors now." Say, "This transition accelerates every month, and early positioning becomes more valuable as more people recognize what's happening." Fourth, acknowledge that your specific approach might fail while maintaining that the underlying change is unstoppable. Musk often says, "Tesla might not be the company that leads the electric transition, but some company will, and that company will be worth hundreds of billions of dollars." The entrepreneurs who master inevitability thinking don't just raise more money, they attract investors who become true believers rather than skeptical monitors. They create psychological momentum that makes success feel predetermined rather than uncertain. Elon Musk proved that 4 simple words could convince people to bet billions on impossible-sounding ideas. The question is, what inevitable change are you helping the world recognize, and how will you position yourself as the obvious choice for people who want to be on the right side of history? Comment below and tell me about an inevitable trend you've identified in your industry, and if this video changed how you think about presenting your ideas. Make sure you're subscribed, because next week I'm revealing the specific psychological techniques that Warren Buffett uses to make complex investments seem obvious to regular people.